There's a pattern so silent, so deeply woven into the fabric of human behavior, that most people live their entire lives trapped inside it without ever knowing its name. You meet someone. The attraction is immediate, magnetic, almost undeniable. But within weeks, sometimes days, you begin to feel it. That familiar distance, the unreturned texts, the vague plans, the emotional walls that seem to rise higher the closer you try to get. And here's what's haunting. This isn't the first time. This is the third person, the fifth, the 10th. Different faces, different stories, but the same unreachable heart. You keep falling for people who cannot love you back. And the question that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning is always the same. Why? This isn't about bad luck. It isn't about coincidence. What you're experiencing is a psychological pattern, a behavioral loop so precise, so predictable, that once you understand its architecture, you'll see it everywhere. Not just in your relationships, but in the relationships of people around you. Friends who always choose partners who won't commit. Siblings who fall for those who are perpetually not ready. Colleagues who are drawn to people who withhold affection like it's currency. The pattern of choosing emotionally unavailable partners operates beneath conscious awareness. It's driven by forces that were set in motion long before you met any of these people. Forces rooted in your earliest experiences of attachment, your understanding of love's texture, and the invisible scripts written in your subconscious mind during childhood. These scripts dictate not just who you're attracted to, but who feels like home, even when that home is a place where you're never truly welcome. What makes this pattern so insidious is that it disguises itself as chemistry, as passion, as connection. The very feelings you trust to guide you toward love are the same feelings leading you back into the same trap, over and over again. And the truth waiting at the center of this pattern? It will change everything you think you know about attraction, about yourself, and about why certain people feel impossible to resist. Stage 1. The recognition. It begins with a feeling you can't quite name. When you meet an emotionally unavailable person, something inside you recognizes them instantly. This isn't conscious recognition. This is your nervous system responding to familiar emotional terrain. They might be charming but slightly distant, passionate but inconsistent. They offer glimpses of intimacy followed by sudden withdrawal. And instead of seeing these as warning signs, your subconscious mind registers them as signals of attraction. Here's the psychological mechanism at work. If your early experiences of love came with conditions, uncertainty, or emotional inconsistency, your brain wired itself to associate those feelings with connection. A parent who was sometimes warm, sometimes cold. A caregiver whose affection had to be earned through performance or compliance. A home where love felt like a resource in short supply. These experiences created a template, what psychologists call an attachment schema. And when you meet someone whose emotional availability mirrors that early template, your brain doesn't register danger. It registers familiarity. And familiarity to the human nervous system feels like safety. Stage 2. The chase. Once recognition occurs, the pattern shifts into its second phase. Pursuit. With an emotionally available partner, attraction might develop steadily, building trust over time. But with someone who is unavailable, the dynamic becomes a chase. They give just enough to keep you engaged, a late-night conversation where they open up, a moment of vulnerability that feels rare and precious, and then they pull away. This intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful behavioral conditioning mechanisms known to psychology. B.F. Skinner demonstrated that unpredictable rewards create stronger behavioral patterns than consistent ones. When affection comes randomly, sporadically, your brain becomes hyper-focused on earning the next moment of closeness. Every text they send triggers a dopamine response. Every small gesture of warmth feels like victory. You begin to organize your emotional life around their availability, waiting for the moments when they let you in, convincing yourself that if you just try harder, understand them better, or give them more space, they'll finally choose you completely. But here's what you don't see. The chase itself has become the relationship. The longing, the uncertainty, the hope that this time will be different. This is where your emotional energy lives. You're not actually building intimacy. You're trapped in a loop of seeking validation that never fully arrives. Stage 3. The false breakthrough. Eventually, something shifts. They open up more. They seem more present. They say things that make you believe the distance was temporary, that the walls are finally coming down. This is the stage where hope surges back with devastating force. You think, this is it. This is the moment everything changes. Psychologically, this stage serves a specific function in the pattern. It reinforces your belief that your effort is working, that the relationship is progressing. In reality, what's happening is a temporary regression to the mean. Emotionally unavailable people aren't incapable of moments of connection. They simply cannot sustain them. Their emotional architecture doesn't allow for consistent vulnerability. So they move closer, briefly, and then the inevitable withdrawal begins again. But in your mind, this moment of closeness becomes evidence. Proof that the connection is real. Proof that if you just remain patient, understanding, and devoted, the relationship you want is possible. This false breakthrough keeps you invested for months, sometimes years, because it confirms what you desperately want to believe, that love is something you can earn through persistence. Stage 4. The inevitable distance. Then comes the withdrawal. It might be sudden, a conversation that shifts their demeanor, a new life circumstance they use as justification, or it might be gradual, a slow fade where their presence becomes increasingly inconsistent. They grow distant again. Plans become vague, communication becomes sporadic. The warmth you glimpsed disappears behind familiar walls. And here's where the pattern reveals its cruelest dimension. You blame yourself. You analyze every interaction, searching for the moment you said or did something wrong. You convince yourself that if you had been different, more patient, less needy, more understanding, they would have stayed open. This self-blame is a cognitive distortion, but it serves a psychological purpose. If the problem is you, then you have control. If you can fix yourself, you can fix the relationship. The alternative, that this person is simply incapable of the intimacy you need, is too painful to accept because it would mean the relationship is fundamentally impossible. Stage 5. The cycle repeats. Most people exit the relationship at this point. They finally recognize the pattern is unsustainable. But here's the hidden mechanism that ensures the cycle continues. When you leave one emotionally unavailable partner, you carry the unresolved attachment wound into your next relationship. You haven't processed why this person felt so compelling. You haven't examined the deeper forces that made their unavailability feel like a challenge worth accepting. So you meet someone new, and if they're emotionally available, if they're consistent, transparent, and willing to build real intimacy, something inside you feels uncertain. They might feel too easy, too available. The relationship lacks the intensity you associate with deep connection. There's no chase, no longing, no need to prove your worth. And because your nervous system has been conditioned to equate love with pursuit, you mistake this stability for absence of passion. You convince yourself there's no chemistry. And often, without realizing it, you find yourself drawn once again to someone who feels just out of reach. So what's actually happening beneath the surface? Why does this pattern have such unshakable power over human behavior? The answer lies in a psychological phenomenon called repetition compulsion. First identified by Sigmund Freud, repetition compulsion describes the unconscious drive to recreate unresolved emotional experiences from the past. Your psyche isn't trying to torture you, it's trying to master an old wound. When love in childhood felt conditional, distant, or unpredictable, a part of you remains frozen in that experience, still trying to earn the affection that was withheld. By choosing emotionally unavailable partners in adulthood, you unconsciously create opportunities to rewrite that story. This time you tell yourself, you'll be good enough. This time you'll finally earn the love you've been seeking. But the mechanism goes deeper. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, reveals that our early relationships with caregivers create internal working models, mental frameworks that shape how we understand relationships for the rest of our lives. If your attachment figures were inconsistent, if their affection had to be chased or earned, your nervous system learned that love requires effort, vigilance, and tolerance for emotional distance. People who experienced secure attachment, caregivers who were reliably present and responsive, developed nervous systems that expect consistency. Distance feels wrong to them, but if your system was wired in uncertainty, distance feels normal. Closeness, paradoxically, can trigger anxiety. There's also a cognitive bias at play called the scarcity principle. Humans assign greater value to things that are rare or difficult to obtain. When someone is emotionally unavailable, their attention becomes scarce. Every moment they're present feels precious. Every gesture of affection feels significant. Your brain interprets this scarcity as a signal of value. If their love is hard to get, it must be worth having. Meanwhile, someone who offers consistent affection doesn't trigger the same neurological response. Their availability doesn't activate your reward circuitry the same way. So you mistake emotional unavailability for depth and mistake emotional availability for shallowness. Finally, there's the issue of self-worth. If you internalize the belief that you are unworthy of consistent love, perhaps because early relationships taught you that affection is conditional or that your needs are too much, then emotionally unavailable partners confirm your deepest beliefs about yourself. The relationship becomes a mirror reflecting what you secretly fear is true, that you are not enough. And perversely, this confirmation feels more comfortable than a relationship that would challenge that belief. Being loved fully would require you to confront and dismantle the story you've been telling yourself about your worth. It's psychologically easier to stay in patterns that confirm your existing self-concept, even when those patterns cause suffering. Here's the devastating truth about psychological patterns. They don't require your consent to continue. They operate automatically, beneath the threshold of conscious awareness, guided by neural pathways carved deep through repetition. Every time you choose an emotionally unavailable partner, you strengthen those pathways. Every time you tolerate inconsistent affection, you teach your nervous system that this is what relationships look like. Every time you stay in a dynamic that requires you to chase, to prove, to wait, you reinforce the belief that love is something earned through suffering. The pattern repeats because it's self-sustaining. It creates its own evidence. When you're with an emotionally unavailable partner, you're constantly in a state of longing. That longing feels intense. And intensity, in the absence of other reference points, gets mistaken for love. So you exit the relationship believing you experienced something profound, even though what you actually experienced was anxiety, uncertainty, and emotional deprivation. And because you never address the root wound, the early experiences that taught you love comes with distance. You carry the entire architecture of the pattern into every new relationship. The faces change, the circumstances vary, but the emotional script remains identical. You're drawn to people who recreate the same dynamic because that dynamic is the only version of love your nervous system recognizes. Breaking a psychological pattern this entrenched requires more than awareness. It requires interrupting the automatic responses that keep it alive. The first step is learning to recognize the feeling of familiarity as a warning sign, not a green light. When you meet someone and feel that immediate magnetic pull, That sense that you've known them before, that they understand you in ways others don't. Pause. Ask yourself, does this person feel familiar because they're right for me, or because they're recreating an old dynamic? Does their emotional distance feel like a challenge I want to overcome, or does it feel like home? Start paying attention to your nervous system's responses. Notice when you feel calm versus when you feel activated. Emotionally unavailable people tend to create a state of chronic activation. Your body is always slightly on edge, waiting for the next moment of connection, bracing for the next withdrawal. If you find yourself constantly checking your phone, analyzing their behavior, wondering where you stand, that's not passion, that's anxiety. Real intimacy creates a sense of groundedness. It might not have the same dramatic intensity, but it allows your nervous system to rest. Practice sitting with the discomfort of emotional availability. If you meet someone who is consistent, who communicates clearly, who doesn't make you guess or chase, and your first instinct is to feel bored or uninterested, recognize that response as your pattern speaking. Your nervous system has been conditioned to equate drama with depth. Retraining it requires conscious effort. You have to repeatedly choose different, even when different feels wrong. Examine your relationship with self-worth. Write down the beliefs you hold about whether you deserve consistent love, not the beliefs you wish you had, the ones you actually carry. If you find beliefs like, I have to earn affection, or my needs are too much, or I'm only lovable when I'm useful, understand that these beliefs will continue to draw you toward people who confirm them. Changing the pattern externally requires changing the story internally. Finally, develop the capacity to leave early. Most people stay in these relationships far longer than necessary because they're waiting for the person to change, or they're hoping the next breakthrough will be permanent. But emotionally unavailable people don't change because you love them harder. They change, if they change at all, through their own internal work, which has nothing to do with you. The moment you recognize the pattern, the moment you see the cycle beginning, you have a choice. You can stay and hope, or you can leave and protect the part of you that deserves something different. So here's what you need to understand. The reason you keep falling for emotionally unavailable partners isn't because you're broken, or because you're attracted to the wrong people, or because you have bad judgment. It's because somewhere, long ago, you learned that love looks like longing. That connection requires effort. That affection is something you have to chase, earn, or wait for. And until you unlearn those lessons, until you rewire the part of your nervous system that mistakes distance for depth, the pattern will continue to find you. Psychological patterns are invisible architects. They shape your choices, your attractions, your relationships, without ever announcing themselves. But once you see the pattern, once you understand its structure and origins, you reclaim the power to choose differently. The next time you meet someone whose distance feels magnetic, whose unavailability feels like a challenge worth accepting, you'll recognize what's happening. And in that recognition, you'll have the chance to break the cycle. Because the pattern doesn't have to repeat. You just have to decide it ends with you.